Hi everybody, and welcome to another WeatherCastUSA Quickcast. On this Quickcast, we're going to break down the continued winter storm threat affecting millions of people across the southern, central, and eastern United States. We'll take a look at some changes in the models in the last 24 hours or so, and take a look at how those changes affect some of your winter precipitation forecasts. So let's get into it. First, I want to start looking at the winter storm and take a look at this. This is a really interesting fact. Over 2,000 miles of contiguous United States territory covered under those winter storm warnings, from near Albuquerque, New Mexico, all the way up through Cape Cod in Massachusetts, from north to south, all the way from Montpelier in Vermont, northern parts of New Hampshire, Vermont, and upstate New York, all the way down into the Gulf Coast around Houston, San Antonio, Austin, and including on the Mexican border there in southwest Texas. Entire states are covered with winter storm warnings, and not just the little states like New Jersey and Delaware, but some of the larger states, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Virginia, looks like most of Oklahoma, Arkansas. So just some larger states also covered, and then quite a large portion of Texas covered by winter storm warnings. It's going to be a long duration winter storm event. We talked about that in yesterday's video, and we also detailed a lot of the model data. So if you want to take a look and go back and review what we did yesterday, link probably somewhere over here, somewhere on the screen. And if the link doesn't show up on your screen, I'll link it in the description as well to last night's video. Most of that information is still pretty accurate. There hasn't been any large changes, and I'll show you those. Some of those adjustments in the latest forecast, but really, if you're under a winter storm warning or watched last night, you're pretty much in a winter storm warning today. So not much changes, and really no big changes. If you were under the threat of heavy snow last night, that pretty much has stayed consistent. If you were under the threat of this heavy sleet and mix, as well as the ice storm, pretty much not much changes there. If anything, I think we'll look at it in a second, but the ice threat has shifted just a little bit southward, and you can see that in this purple color. These are ice storm warnings. You can see here a lot more ice storm warnings, including parts of the Atlanta metro, much of South Carolina now under an ice storm warning, parts of not just northeast Georgia, but down into northern Georgia. And then also ice storm warnings stretch down into the western parts and even southwestern parts of Louisiana, around Beaumont, Port Arthur, and areas just to the north and east of Houston, Texas, now under ice storm warnings. So that's been one of the larger changes to this map. Obviously, yesterday we expected it and mentioned it, that most of the East Coast last night in the video was not under a winter storm warning. The winter storm watches were out, and it's just a matter of time for those to convert over to winter storm warnings. And I believe all of those have basically converted over by now. So so that verified, that's not really a big change, just something that was routine and going to happen. And yeah, you can see, like we pointed out yesterday, much of this area also overlapped with cold weather advisories and also cold weather warnings, especially across the northern tier. That's where we have these cold weather warnings in the blue colors. And those are for some temperatures in those blue colors in the northern tier of the U.S., especially upper Midwest and northern plains, in the Dakotas and into Minnesota, parts of Wisconsin. Those temperatures are not just going to be cold air temperatures well below the freezing mark and below zero, but with wind chills 50 to 60 below zero in some of those areas over the weekend. So some very cold air funneling into the continental U.S. And that cold air is eventually going to make it down towards the Gulf Coast. And that's why we have these winter storm warnings covering parts of the south and southeast. And with those cold temperatures plunging into the United States, I wanted to take a look at this. This is something that's been developing this afternoon. Our first plume of moisture is starting to override the sub-freezing temperatures at the surface level in western Texas and the Texas Panhandle. And I overlaid a couple things just to set this up. But essentially this white arrow is the direction of this plume of moisture. So right now it's coming up from southwest Texas and across the Texas Panhandle, areas like Midland, Lubbock, and over towards Wichita Falls. And then it's also starting to get into extreme southwestern portions of Oklahoma. The blue line, this kind of teal color line I drew along here, is right now the approximate location of those sub-freezing temperatures across areas like Big Spring, Snyder, Texas, Abilene, and then up towards obviously Lubbock and Amarillo into the Texas Panhandle. Really, all the Texas Panhandle is under the sub-freezing temperatures. Actually, some really cold temperatures coming into the northern Texas Panhandle, all the way down into the single digits near Dalhart, Texas, and up towards the Oklahoma Panhandle, about 10 degrees just north of Amarillo, and then in the teens and 20s for much of the rest of the Texas Panhandle. That's cold enough below freezing at the surface that this warmer moisture flow across this is falling as rain into those sub-freezing temperatures at the surface level, and that's creating already a round of some pretty significant freezing rain and sleet mixing in across the Texas Panhandle. Right now at this time, and we're shooting this at 4:45 in the central time zone. Right now at this time, there is you're going to get through the commute in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So if you're doing any last minute plans, and we talked about this last night on last night's video, and that's not just planning, supplies. If you're going on a food run or going to get, water and supplies, you have a little bit of time to do that on your way home from work this evening. And then also the preferred option, and really the best practice if you can, is to get in a spot tonight that you want to ride out the weekend and really ride out this storm in, potentially into early parts of next week, at least Monday. Give Monday time to clear out too, because it's going to be very cold after this. So any precip that falls in the form of the winter precip, but also in the form of rain across especially central Texas, could also freeze over in a flash freeze scenario by later in the weekend. But certainly across the Dallas-Fort Worth area and points into North Texas and into Oklahoma, it's going to be a pretty heavy onslaught of mixed precip, heavy snow on the north side, ice and freezing rain and sleet on that south side across the Red River. And so yeah, if you can tonight across that Dallas-Fort Worth area, you have a couple hours before the temperatures plunge off to get any last minute chores done and get to a safe, secure place where you feel comfortable riding out the weekend and the winter storm. Across Oklahoma, you can already see Oklahoma, much of Oklahoma already falling below freezing. So as this plume of moisture continues to work up towards the Oklahoma City area later here this evening, and really even early evening, again, it's about 4:45, so even by 6 or 7 o'clock, we may start to get some wintry precip into the OKC metro. A little less time to finish any last-minute preparations across the Oklahoma City metro. And so here again, right now, Dallas-Fort Worth sitting in the 40s. It's actually about 45 in Dallas, 38 in Fort Worth, so that cold air is already starting to intrude into the area. Not a very large distance here, but about 10 to 20 degrees difference in temperature between the Dallas-Fort Worth metro and areas around OKC. So very sharp divide in this freezing weather. And just a quick look moving the radar site to the Frederick radar. We can see some of that winter precip starting to show up on the radar around Lawton, Oklahoma, down towards Wichita Falls. And then a very cold rain and drizzle across areas in North Texas right now, from Dallas-Fort Worth up to the Oklahoma border. That is slowly going to shift over into a freezing rain scenario. You can see not far north of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It does get too close to that freezing mark. So if you do have plans leaving Dallas-Fort Worth and headed to north or west, you're going to get quicker into some of the potential for some slippery roads and things, especially later in the evening after sunset. A little bit further to the north, we're also seeing some light snow. I don't know if any of this is actually hitting the ground right now, but at least the atmosphere is starting to fill in with some moisture in that cold environment where it's going to be an all snow event across portions of Kansas. You can see, especially north and west of Wichita, snow showers kind of developing across this area into central and western Kansas. So we will keep an eye on that. The models don't have a lot in this area right now. The models that initialize in this kind of Friday evening time slot. So we'll see. This could be a little bit more. It just depends. The models sometimes, if they initialize completely wrong, we'll get the forecast, pretty much wrong. So something to watch here is that if this really starts to fill in with some snow, that could change some of the model data in the next model runs. But right now, it seems like it's very light snow. It's likely if the snow isn't reaching the ground, it'll at least help, again, moisten the atmospheric column and help for more snow to kind of move into this area as the moisture overruns the cold air to get the snow started earlier than some of the models were thinking. I'll show you in the models why I'm a little skeptical of big snow really reaching up to the I-70 corridor. So let's get into that. Let's take a look at the model comparison, and we'll go through also some of those differences in the models compared to yesterday. So let's get into taking a look at the latest forecast and some of the adjustments I made over the last day with these forecasts based on some of the different model runs, and then we'll take a brief look at some of those changes on those models. This is a similar graphic to the one in last night's video. A couple distinct changes. Last night we were, and even during the day yesterday on our other social media, noting some of the uptick in the parameters on some of the severe weather parameters, especially across the Gulf South, and went into some detail on last night's video on some of those parameters and why I thought there was a chance at least of some severe activity that wasn't really being modeled much before yesterday and also wasn't being reflected on the Storm Prediction Center severe outlooks. That did change this morning, and the Storm Prediction Center does have a severe outlook for the day 3 Sunday across portions of South Alabama, extreme southeast and coastal parts of Mississippi, also far southeast Louisiana, and then to western Georgia and the Florida Panhandle. That's one of the changes you can see reflected in that red color across the Gulf South. Still pretty much rounds of thunderstorms across the south from Texas all the way across the Gulf Coast into northern Florida and then across the eastern part of the Carolinas as the storm system works east. We did bump the ice storm color down a little bit, as it does look like icing will, more significant icing will be into especially eastern and central parts of Texas, especially the next round comes through on Saturday into Sunday. And then also bumped it down below basically the I-20 corridor. It's one of the bigger changes on the models, as well as the warnings and watches you can see that we outlined here at the start of the video. That also bumped a little bit more ice threat into northern Georgia, especially to like northeastern Georgia, and then a little bit closer to the coastal areas of the Carolinas. A few adjustments of a few miles, but those are some pretty significant adjustments overall. That overall the trend for colder air further south does appear like the ice threat is going to sink to the south a little bit. And then the other thing that it's hard to really show in graphics because you want to keep it fairly simple so it's easy to read, not too complex. People can grasp it fairly quickly, especially when you're making graphics for social media on weather, or also even forecast videos and even broadcast videos. Broadcast meteorologists maybe have a few minutes to capture the audience, so you don't want to go too in-depth with graphics. That's why this one, I'm trying to balance the information with the visual aspect so people can at least grasp fairly quickly their main threat with this storm system. But it doesn't cover that parts of this area in the ice storm color, especially into the Tennessee Valley, will actually transition to rain, maybe get some more thunderstorms, and then back to ice. So there is going to be a period where you may go from freezing rain, then the warm nose comes in, warms things up through a brief period, get all rain, and then some thunderstorms, and then back to ice and freeze as the cold front swings through. So there's going to be periods of that, and really kind of along really all these areas. Same for the wintry mix zone. As the warm nose comes into your area, you may get a little bit more of a transition to freezing rain, and then a transition back to the mix, precip, and the sleet. And then in a lot of these spots, some of these areas, especially like Oklahoma, will eventually transition to mostly all snow on the backside of the system. So areas that start out as freezing rain and sleet may finish as snow. Same for the Dallas-Fort Worth area, although you're primarily going to be in the dangerous hazard of freezing rain. As that back edge of the system swings through, you may get enough cold air through the atmospheric column that it ends as all snow. And that has its own hazards, that snow is going to be covering up layers of ice and creating all kinds of hazards for walking and driving and travel. Parts in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, some of that is going to be the reverse. You may start out as some snow and even heavy at times across the Mid-Atlantic, and then as the warm nose of air comes in, the atmospheric column warms across the column. It warms up to a mix, up to freezing rain, and then in parts of, especially I think the Delmarva, and even I think into southern parts of Jersey, you may get even a period of all rain before, again, some of that transitions on the cold side back to some wintry precip. Yeah, some of these areas have tricky forecasts, have really complex scenarios where you may get all types of the winter weather And yeah, and there's still going to be changes to the forecast, as well as now that we're getting started with the actual system starting to kick out from the Rockies into the south central parts of the U.S. Really more now casting as we start to see how exactly that develops and where that system tracks compared to where the models had it. We're getting into that time frame when, you know, there's going to be changes, but it's going to be more like quick changes versus, you know, forecasting a few days ahead. Some of the other changes that I made on this graphic is we bumped the heavy snow, the back edge of that, down a little bit, closer to the I-70 corridor across Missouri, across Illinois and Indiana, and northwest parts of Ohio, and also bumped some of the heavy snow back from the Kansas City area and quite a bit of, frankly, quite a bit of Kansas. We'll see. I've been pretty confident, and the GFS showed a lot of it in the last couple days, that the dry air may win out. The massive amount of cold, dry air across the upper Midwest and filtering south may help kind of limit some of that northern edge of the heavier snow. And the models trended up in that area yesterday through the day, through various model runs over that kind of 12 to 24 hour period. The models really trended away from that trend and showed pretty significant snowfall across the I-70 corridor. They have shifted back a little bit, and I'm kind of shifting it back, I think, even more towards my original forecast of a more narrow band of heavy snow from the southern plains up through the northeast. It does spread out a little bit as we get into the northeast, as we get into more of a coastal low developing. Not a super strong one, but just a little bit more of a coastal low situation and kicking some of that moisture back across the higher terrain of the northeast. I think still a lot of New York, most of New England gets in on some of that heavier snow. Again, areas like the mid-Atlantic, it's going to be a mix, heavy snow, and then probably transitioning over to sleet and some freezing rain, even into the Baltimore, Washington area, and then possibly back to some snow. So you may get all of it. And yeah, that's the other thing this graphic doesn't do the best job at, is conveying that there's going to be transition periods from heavy snow to heavy sleet to freezing rain, back to heavy snow. So some of those areas are a little more complex than the graphic shows. I did bump a little bit more of that wintry mix across southern parts of Oklahoma, as I do think, even though it's going to be pretty cold, Oklahoma City and especially the South Metro does get into more of a sleet and some freezing rain mix again, but more of a sleet situation. I still think the best chance of some 12-foot plus is probably going to be in northeast Oklahoma and extreme northwest Arkansas, maybe into southern Missouri, and then somewhere across, I think, the Ohio River Valley, especially immediate to the Ohio River in Kentucky, maybe around Louisville or southern Indiana, some of those higher terrain areas on the bluffs of the Ohio River, into probably southeast parts of Ohio, and then up into the Adirondacks and some of the higher terrain across the northeast, likely getting over a foot of snow. A pretty wide area, I think, has a good shot at that 8 to 12 inches of snow, and that's kind of what that darker blue color is indicating, a general area of 8 to 12 inches of snow, with some pockets of 12 to 16 inches still on the table. The medium blue color where it says snow, that's where I'm kind of thinking it's more going to be in that, say like 3 to 6 inch kind of range. Probably not going to completely shut down your location, especially in the northern parts of this, around Michigan, Toledo, northern Indiana. 3 to 6 inches of snow. Most of those communities are pretty good at dealing with those and can handle it. And even back across the I-70 corridor, Kansas City, Topeka. Kansas City's right on that line. I think to the north and west are going to get less snow. To the south and east to Kansas City, you're going to get a pretty significant snow. And that's kind of where we have that dividing line. Same for St. Louis. St. Louis maybe bumps a little bit more of the metro area of St. Louis into that heavier snow. I think we're looking at about 5 to 8 inches in the St. Louis area. But yeah, south of St. Louis, and especially I think southeast of St. Louis into southern Illinois, that's where we could get into some of those higher totals as well. Let's quickly look at our differences in those models with our graphics from our friends at Pivotal Weather. So check them out at pivotalweather.com. So this is the latest run of the Euro model. Starting out here, we can see that low developing across the Rockies, especially the southern Rockies, the Colorado Rockies. We can still see that upper level low that's kicking across the Baja California, and doing a pretty good job here along the Euro model of showing this plume of moisture, basically an atmospheric river of moisture off the subtropical Pacific, crossing northern Mexico and then interacting with that cold air. Also pulling up a general frothiness across the Gulf Coast with that temperature difference is also helping to pull some moisture up across the Gulf Coast. So we have Gulf moisture, we have Pacific moisture, and that's obviously interacting. You don't need to be a PhD meteorologist to see the bad situation here, that we have warm, moist air meeting up with really, really cold air. And that's what's creating this situation here with the freezing rain, sleet already developing across West Texas and then moving into Oklahoma in the evening hours. From, some lighter to moderate freezing rain into some pretty heavy rain, freezing rain, sleet, and snow later this evening and into the overnight hours across Oklahoma, the Red River Valley, and across West Texas, starting to spread into the Ozarks and into the Arkansas River Valley later this evening, and especially overnight. Not going to be a fun travel if you have overnight travel, say the truckers. If you're traveling from Memphis to Oklahoma City overnight, if you can, avoid it. I know sometimes people can't. That's just going to be a really nasty ride. And then this is that first wave that we're going to see develop pretty linear on the Euro model here, with snow across the Ozarks and freezing rain and sleet across the Arkansas River Valley, and then storms and rain across much of Louisiana, especially north of I-20. You can see here later in the day on Saturday, that pushes into the Ohio Valley, starting out as snow, freezing rain and sleet for much of Tennessee, and then back into the Memphis area, into northern parts of Mississippi. You're going to get really hammered with some of that freezing rain and potential for some significant to crippling ice storm across that lower Mississippi Valley and that Tennessee Valley area. A brief break tomorrow afternoon. Things may lighten up a little bit. It may look kind of suspiciously peaceful for a while, so try to resist the urge to really get out, especially in these areas that got heavy freezing rain over the morning hours on Saturday. Snow lightens up across the mid-Mississippi Valley a little bit into Saturday afternoon. Still maybe some snow showers and light snow across those areas, but we can start to see that second system, or that second wave of this system, developing off the low pressure over the Rockies, with starting to pick up bands of heavier snow into the Texas Panhandle and western Texas, and then another pretty good slug of freezing precip coming out of western Texas into the Red River Valley. And again, by Saturday night, starts to really fill in. We see the cold air damming along the Appalachians really starting to factor in with that heavy slug of moisture in the round one, encountering the cool air across the Carolinas. Significant icing potential there for areas like Charlotte, Columbia, up towards Raleigh-Durham, and then the snow developing across the parts of the Appalachians into the mid-Atlantic. This is one of those areas in Virginia where you may start out with some pretty heavy snow and then transition to more of a mixed precip as the system goes on. And you can kind of see that as I put it into motion into Sunday. That warm nose lifting up towards the Baltimore-Washington corridor, bringing most of Virginia into the mixed precip of freezing rain and sleet, with the coastal areas along areas like Norfolk, Virginia Beach, up towards Ocean City, Maryland, and then Delmarva, potentially transitioning over to above freezing and just general rain and storms, as we start to see the next kind of wave of this develop a little coastal low. As the back edge of the storm system, that secondary wave, is still producing some pretty heavy sleet and freezing rain across the Tennessee Valley into the Ohio Valley, and still snow on that northern side from the northeast all the way back into the mid-Mississippi Valley with some trailing snow. We can see here, this model does show a little bit more concentrated area of storms down across Alabama, southern Mississippi. That's where we do have to watch for some severe weather. You can see that warm nose does make it up into southern Jersey, according to the Euro model, with a really heavy slug of mixed precip, even freezing rain spreading up into much of Maryland, the Washington-Baltimore corridor, as a line of potentially some thunder, sleet, and thunder ice gets up into the Carolinas and the mid-Atlantic. Heavy snow across southern New England, especially areas around Boston, back to Worcester, up into southern Maine. Northern Maine should get out of the really heavy snow, but especially down east Maine could get some pretty significant snow there. And then back into the capital corridor of New York State, still getting some pretty heavy snow. into Monday and even into Tuesday, those snow showers and snow bands may stick around in northern New England. But otherwise, it's going to be mega cold across the East Coast. We're not seeing a big warm up. It's not going to melt Monday or Tuesday. If anything, we could see some flash freeze situations down across the Southeast. Areas that got rain and heavy rain and storms could go below freezing Sunday night into Monday and stay below freezing, creating some of those flash freeze situations. You want to look at the GFS. This is the latest GFS run to match that Euro model. Starting out very similar, we can see the precip starting to transition over to wintry precip in West Texas, the Texas Panhandle, and especially north of the Red River Valley. I think that's pretty much accurate to what we are seeing right now. So I always like to start out with some good initiation of the model. And very similar to the Euro model, we can see into the evening, into late Friday, early Saturday, really gets pumping with some heavy snow and then heavy sleet and freezing rain across the Red River Valley. This is going to be a pretty good big snowmaker, I think, for northeast parts of Oklahoma, especially here into the next 12 hours or so, Friday into Saturday, and then across the Boston Mountains and across the Ozarks, northern Arkansas getting it pretty good here on Saturday morning. The GFS still, I think, is a little bit south of where the Euro is. Jonesboro up to Fayetteville and northwest Arkansas, getting in a pretty good band of heavy snow on the GFS, where, yeah, it shows that area, but I think it does lift a little bit more freezing rain up into Arkansas at that same time frame. So we'll keep an eye on that one. Yeah, the GFS keeping a lot of the freezing rain south of the Missouri-Arkansas state line, where the Euro brings some of that freezing rain and sleet and mixed precip up into the boot heel of Missouri and the confluence of the Ohio River. So there are still some differences between these models. They both do show this warm nose kind of working up into Tennessee. So if you're a snow lover in Tennessee, both of the models show you starting out as more snow and then sleet and freezing rain build in pretty quickly through the day on Saturday. This also does show that kind of 1-2 punch, with the first wave moving off into the Carolinas and the Ohio Valley, while on late Saturday, early Sunday, that second system, or that second wave of this system, starts to develop across the Southwest and the Texas, especially West Texas, and then overspreading into the lower Mississippi Valley. I think the GFS is showing some pretty good ideas here of potentially some convective bands within this system. So again, there could be some thunder sleet, thunder ice, and even some thunder snow across portions of these areas as we go through this system. So don't let that surprise you. That could happen pretty easy, as some of this starts out as thunderstorms across the Gulf Coast and rides north and east into that freezing surface level, and you get some pretty heavy precip really quickly with lightning and thunder. GFS, I think, is doing a pretty good job of showing where some of this really heavy ice storm is going to be on the weekend, from eastern Texas, northeast Texas, across northern parts of Louisiana, northwest parts of Mississippi, into the Tennessee Valley, and then also into the Carolinas. Some pretty heavy icing on this model run. That's actually really concerning. I think this is uptrended since the last time I really dove into the GFS model. So if those trends continue, we do have to watch that. Some really significant icing potential, crippling ice storm. And yeah, the models are fairly similar. They show the warm nose making it up into eastern Tennessee, transitioning from ice and freezing rain over to rain for a little bit, but then the back end, you do see the freezing precip kind of reignite on the backside, where it could be some heavy, again, freezing precip. After you get some rain and storms and it warms up briefly, it quickly crashes back down below freezing and you get some wrap. This one also shows that transition from the low pressure across the east to a little bit of a developing coastal low. Not super tight. It's a 1006 millibar low. That's not a really deep low pressure. There is going to be a somewhat of a low pressure forming off the Delmarva likely, and then riding up along the east coast, paralleling that east coast, funneling some moisture off the Atlantic back into the northeast. So that is where this is going to be a pretty good snow event across Boston and southern New England and into the upstate New York, into Pennsylvania. Again, watching that freezing rain sleet mix reaching up into the Baltimore-Washington corridor, really all of I-95 there. And also I think New York City is a really tricky forecast. North and west of New York City, it's going to be mostly snow in northern New Jersey, into Connecticut, and into the Hudson Valley. But New York City and then points east, especially on Long Island, more of a sleet, freezing rain, and snow kind of mix, starting as snow, transitioning over to sleet, and ending potentially as freezing rain and even some just general rain before wrapping up finally with some snow showers. Long Island, coastal Connecticut, coastal Rhode Island, and also southeast Massachusetts are another area that could get kind of the whole thing. Looking at the latest runs, these are the latest models for the snow output, and I think it underdoes it a little bit in the Northeast, but it is showing a general 8-10 inches of snow across portions of the Ohio Valley into the Northeast. I think there are some of these areas, especially these higher elevations in the Alleghenies in Pennsylvania, even into central Pennsylvania, up the Susquehanna River Valley. I think you could get a foot of snow in those areas. And then across the Capital Corridor, the Hudson Valley, and then especially I think central and western Mass could get in on a foot of snow, even a little more. A little bit of lake effect snow also kicks in off the lakes. That's going to produce some higher snowfall totals, downwind of Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. This is the Euro model, and it is showing also that pretty good area of snow across portions of central and northeast portions of Oklahoma into northwest parts of Arkansas. It's still putting out 17 inches of snow. I think it's going to be hard to get there, but I think some of these areas, someone in this area in Oklahoma or extreme southwest Missouri or extreme northern Arkansas, I think is going to win out with 12 to 14 inches of snow at least. And then this latest run is producing less snow across much of Tennessee. So I do agree with that. I think Tennessee is going to get some snow, but then that transitions over to freezing rain, sleet, and even rain at times. Also, North Carolina, if you're a snow lover in North Carolina, I do kind of agree with this model, taking most of the snow, except for the higher elevations in extreme northwest parts of North Carolina. Largely void of snow. It's mostly going to be a freezing rain with some sleet mixing in, but a lot of the Carolinas, it's really going to be a freezing rain event. The GFS shows similar. I do like that the GFS is still showing a pretty good area of snowfall totals across the Ohio River Valley. Right along the Ohio Valley, this may be just a little bit, maybe this model run may be 50 miles south of where I think maybe the heaviest snow is going to be. Maybe the same here across, that shows some of the heaviest snow right along that area around Fort Smith, Arkansas. I think it's probably just a little bit north of there towards northwest Arkansas, Bentonville, Fayetteville, up to areas just south of Tulsa. So this model doing a pretty good job, I think, showing the pattern of snow. Again, it's maybe off by about 50 miles to the south and east. So if you kind of nudge this just in your own mind, nudge this back about 50 miles, and that I think is going to be a pretty accurate snowfall total. Same for St. Louis. This shows maybe 3 to 4 inches in St. Louis. If I just move this cursor about 50 miles to the south, we're looking at 7 inches of snow or 8 inches of snow. So that's probably, I think, going to work its way at least across the St. Louis metro, where we could have a lot less to the north and a lot more to the south. But yeah, so I think a decent job by the GFS model, to be honest with you. And I do like that the GFS, as well as the Euro, have come in alignment a little bit more. And this is one of those reasons we made that change to the graphic, as I mentioned earlier, and backed off some of the heavier snow across northern Missouri and especially central and northern Illinois, is because both models are in a decent agreement here now that I think that cold air is going to win out and push that heavier snow more into that Ohio Valley versus overspreading more of the Missouri Valley and the Corn Belt. Unfortunately, if you live in northern Missouri, Kirksville, and then over towards Peoria, and then up towards Chicago, it's not going to be much of a snow event for you. It's going to be more of an extreme cold event across those areas. And this is the GFS, and that's the Euro, showing maybe a little bit more snow in those areas. But I kind of agree with the mix of the models. GFS says kind of 1 inch for Kirksville, and Euro says maybe 3 or 4. So if I was modeling the snowfall or putting a graphic together for the snowfall in Kirksville, I probably would have that 1 to 3 inch or 1 to 4 inch kind of range. And then, yeah, we've talked about it a few times here alluding to it on this video, but the models don't initialize a lot of snow across Kansas this evening. There does seem to be some snow falling across central and western Kansas, so we'll see if they readjust. But both models, the Euro and the GFS, have significantly backed off those snowfall totals in Kansas. So if you're a snow lover there, I still think you're going to get a decent snow in that 4 to 6 inch kind of range, but they've backed off the totals they were showing yesterday, where some of the models were showing 10 to 12 inches getting up into the I-70 corridor. I do think this is a more accurate forecast for both the GFS and the Euro, as cold air is going to really kind of keep that heavier snow band to the south. And then we'll end here looking at the GFS for ice accumulation. The models, the GFS and the Euro, tend to overproduce the ice. So some of these areas are showing like 2¼ inches of ice. I don't think it's going to be that big. So drop, an inch or so off of the ice totals, but some of this area, I think, into northern Louisiana and into northwest parts of Mississippi, I think could easily get above an inch of ice, 1.5 inches of ice. But I think we could see some areas up here towards South Haven or areas like Tupelo, Mississippi, could get 1 inch plus of ice, which would be a crippling ice storm. This, I think, does a good job showing that heavier ice across the Texas Hill Country, over the I-20 corridor in Texas, across the Dallas-Fort Worth area, getting some really heavy ice accumulations, parts of northeast Texas, Waco down in that area, also getting some pretty good ice accumulations. Doing a pretty good job of showing the location, not necessarily the totals. Kind of look at it visually without going into a micro detail for it. And then I think the other bullseye that it is kind of indicating here pretty decently is this bullseye into upstate parts of South Carolina and into much of North Carolina, seeing some really significant icing, as well as I think northeast Georgia. Atlanta, you're right on that fine line between seeing if the cool air damming comes down just a little bit more. It's going to be one of those situations where we have to see how far that cool air swings down into Georgia. But if it does, and it could be a difference between 25 and 50 miles, if it makes it that extra 25 to 50 miles, you could be seeing a significant ice storm in the Atlanta metro, especially the north and east suburbs. Right now, it's a little too early to call. You may get just a light glaze of ice, or it may be more of a significant ice storm. And then across Tennessee, parts of southeast Kentucky, I think it's also showing a pretty good job, showing a really serious ice storm across that area of the Mid-South into the Carolinas. It also does kind of indicate there that there's going to be some icing up into the Delmarva and even into southern New Jersey. Not really showing much in the southern coast of New England and Long Island, but there is going to be some icing up into those areas too. This also isn't really initializing some of that sleet totals. A lot of this across Arkansas is going to be heavy sleet. Across the Red River Valley, heavy sleet. There is going to be some ice in here too, so it is doing a little bit of a poor job at showing some of that ice on the northern side. Some of that ice that overlays with the sleet and snow. Not looking great for travel. Again, if you have some time here this evening, and especially if you're on the eastern edge of this, you have some time through the overnight to get to your safe spot before the precip starts. That's the best practice, to get to a safe spot that you want to ride out this storm until, again, potentially Tuesday for some locations, especially in the northeast. But for sure Monday in parts of the south central U.S., the southern U.S., and the Midwest. And then again, dangerous cold comes in behind this. Wind chills, -15 to -25 below zero in parts of areas that don't get a lot of extreme wind chills, but parts of southern Missouri, Arkansas, Kansas, Oklahoma could see well below zero wind chills into Monday and Tuesday morning. Take it easy, stay safe. We will be likely live a few times this weekend, dealing with the wintry weather as well as potentially some of that severe weather. So if you got something out of this video, like and subscribe, click that bell icon to get notifications when we go live, when we post new forecast videos. And also we post a daily blog style weather brief in the mornings, usually mid-morning. So give that a good read. It goes into detail about the day's weather events. The big news story, I think, next week is after this winter storm clears out, it's going to be brutally cold in a lot of the central, south, and eastern parts of the U.S. So we'll be here along with you on WeatherCastUSA with more forecast videos, live streaming coverage of significant weather events and of severe weather, and we'll see you on the next WeatherCast. Thanks, everybody.